The Victorians ruined Jane Austen. Hi, and welcome to Lizcapism. Just as a heads up, you do not need to know almost anything about Jane Austen or have read any of her books to follow this video. Part of the reason I'm talking about this is because, without really trying, you probably have some general assumptions about Jane Austen, without ever having read her books or even seen the movie adaptations, maybe. Today I'm going to sow a little reticule. It's a little purse from the Regency era. It's an item that kicked off our 200-year struggle to get our pockets back. See Bernadette's excellent video on the history of pockets in the card above. This item's only mentioned once in all of Jane Austen's work, but she undoubtedly had one. And like many things in the life of Jane Austen, there's far more to her and her experience than made it into her books. But her books are almost all we have because the Victorians ruined Jane Austen. After a longer break than I intended, here is another addition to my ongoing series about how the 19th century, and particularly the Victorians, have defined so much of our shared ideas about the past and how they got it spectacularly wrong a lot of the time. My intended format, as demonstrated in my first video on the Victorians and the Vikings, is to connect with an expert on a particular topic, someone who can help me sort fact from fiction and help me illuminate not only what the Victorians got wrong, but also where their ideas came from and why they have stayed with us centuries later. That first video, link above, was a conversation with Jimmy from the Welsh Viking channel. Check it out when you're done with this video. It was a great time. So today's topic is, why do we think of Jane Austen in general as being so nice and so mild and so boring? Here's the thing though, this time the expert is me. I promise this isn't going to be a trend. I always want to defer to experts in their specialist subject. However, as this is a subject of my bachelor's degree and ongoing personal research, I felt I would be safe taking on the topic myself. This is the only one for a long time, I promise. So at this point, I probably owe you a quick recap of my credentials so that you know that I'm not telling tales out of school. I have long had an attachment to the works of Jane Austen, having read Pride and Prejudice for the first time when I was about 11, and having read each of the 6 complete novels at least 3 times as of the time of recording. I have a bachelor's degree with distinction in English literature and a minor in French literature. With each of these, I specialized in the 19th century novel, and several courses were devoted at least partially, if not completely, to the life and works of Jane Austen. Along with the above, I'm also a current dues-paying member of the Jane Austen Society of North America, in both the greater organization as well as a more local chapter. Okay, so quick anecdote time. In my 20s, over the course of a few different Secret Santa gift exchanges, I received 5 separate copies of the complete novels of Jane Austen. It seems like during that period in my life, whenever someone who didn't know me well needed to get me a gift, the recommendation from someone who did know me was almost universally, Liz likes Jane Austen. I don't think this in itself is necessarily a credential, but maybe it says something? I don't know. Jane Austen in the broader social context has been built up as a quiet, modest authoress who writes in the serene seclusion of a Hampshire country home. As the daughter, sister, and aunt of various clergymen over the years, she is a pious woman with devotion to family, and especially her numerous nieces and nephews. She shuns the acclaim and notoriety that the decent success of her novels has garnered, a woman who, while witty and possibly bordering on snarky, still upholds the traditional, mild, and wholesome views of her society. If she sometimes satirizes, it is in an affectionate, acceptable way, largely for the benefit of amusing her family. Ugh. This perception is beginning to change. Creative biopics like Becoming Jane, and slightly more holistic documentary series like What Was Jane Austen Really Like? Betray a certain understanding that the picture that we have of Austen isn't wholly accurate, and also speaks to a desire to find out who she really was. But why do we think this way about Jane Austen? You might posit that her books are to blame with their gentle humor, light-hearted subject matter, and unfailingly happy endings, but we know instinctively that this is a flawed way of thinking. Interestingly, perhaps unusually, the blame lies not with Victorians in general, but with a very specific group of Victorians, Jane Austen's own family. Jane Austen had 7 siblings, 6 brothers and 1 sister. During her lifetime, between the ages of 18 and 39, her siblings produced 22 children. An additional 12 children were born after her death. I have not even started mentioning cousins. When the very last of Jane Austen's siblings passed away in 1865, her family, led by James Edward Austen Leigh, decided to collect and publish their recollections of their aunt in a memoir. The reason it's called a memoir and not a biography is twofold. First, these writings were not a sequential, impartial writing of her life story. They were the collective remembrances of various nibblings. Secondly, this was a highly biased portrait of Austen, and not just in the way that memoirs tend to be biased. The depiction of their now famous relative was curated, polished, and intentionally constructed around what the family felt was appropriate and proper. It also lacked certain significant sections of Austen's life, partially for discretionary reasons, but partially because many of her personal letters and manuscripts were inherited by a slightly more distant branch of the family, who, depending on who you ask, either wouldn't give them up or had briefly lost track of them. Yeah, family drama's always been around, folks. Now, to be fair to the family, they didn't try to represent the memoir as being in any way complete, but lacking information isn't the same as explicitly leaving out information, or lying outright about certain facts or circumstances. For example, significant parts of Jane Austen's attachment to and eventually failed relationship with at least 2 suitors are either expunged or radically downplayed, possibly to reinforce that most double-edged of her supposed attributes, her purity. This memoir was designed to serve in the place of biography because the Austen family wanted to keep rival biographers from taking over, I guess, what they felt was a family affair. They jealously withheld facts and perspectives that didn't agree with the general narrative that had been essentially collectively agreed upon by that section of the family, a smattering of nieces and nephews and many distant cousins, many of whom were too young to really remember their aunt, or hadn't even been alive during her lifetime. In case it wasn't obvious from reading the thing that this was a highly biased and curated account of her life, letters between the siblings and cousins reveal very telling phrases, such as, and I quote, "This is not a fact to be written and printed, but you have the authority for saying, etc., etc., etc." Yeah. This memoir painted a picture of Jane Austen that was mild-mannered, genteel, religiously devoted, and unfailingly domestic. And don't get me wrong, Jane Austen might have been all of those things, but the memoir spends an awful lot of time on these things, and much less time on the literary accomplishments of her life. Mentions of her novels are actually bizarrely sparse, and in an especially telling passage, her nephew compares her talent to writing to that of her needlework. Quote, "The same hand which painted so exquisitely with the pen could work as delicately with the needle. Don't get me wrong, I like a bit of needlework as much as the next person, but I would find it hugely insulting if a novel that I had worked on, taken a financial risk on, and eventually published to moderate success was ranked with some nice embroidery. Especially given that it's hard to tell if Austen Leigh is referring to her prose or her penmanship. Her writing is continually referred to in terms of the quality of her penmanship rather than the content of her writing. When the quality of her work is discussed, it is unfailingly to talk about how easily it came to her, how natural her gift was, how everything came out of her pen fully formed onto the page. Her nibblings are not alone in this inexplicably dishonest description of her talent. Her brother, Henry Austen, who also acted as her literary agent and legal representative, had made similar claims. But the revelation and publication of her original manuscripts demonstrate that Austen was a consummate reviser, constantly working her craft to adjust, correct, and improve. Even during the time that she was very ill towards the end of her life, she was revising and changing things. Incidentally, the side of the family who wouldn't give up their documents at the time of the original memoir's writing would eventually publish the letters in their possession along with some additional remembrances and documents about 15 years later. This version of Austen was different, but nowhere near as popular, and it certainly didn't do much to change the perception of the prim and polished Aunt Jane that had by then taken on the veneer of reality. So if this story is so contrived, how do we not realize it before? Why are we, all of these years later, still taken in by this so obviously biased characterization of one of the world's most popular literary icons? Well, as with any question about the past, the answer isn't simple, but let's address one or two of the most understandable points. Despite our perception of the Victorian period as being one of repression and prudery, it pales in comparison with their perception of the Regency period. Victorians loved to set themselves up as being so much more forward-thinking than the generations that came before them, especially the Regency period. So this was already an ideally credible audience who was reading this account of a woman who they already suspected would be the perfect embodiment of all that modest domesticity that they assumed of their forebears, especially when the memoirs were coming from such a supposedly reliable source, her own family. Remember how I mentioned all of those siblings and nibblings? Yeah, those people didn't stop having children, and the legacy of an increasingly distant aunt was not relinquished easily by subsequent generations. The first non-relative to do any kind of in-depth biography or research into the life of Jane Austen was in about 1901, but the continual publishing and republishing of accounts of family members didn't ease up until the 1920s. So 50 years after the first memoir and 100 years after the death of the author is when we were finally released from the stranglehold that the Austen family had maintained on behalf of an aunt of whom now there was no living memory. So who can blame the Victorians or 20th century readers who knew nothing but this depiction of their beloved Austen for their entire lives? So who was Jane Austen really? I don't have an answer, because as you may have seen in previous videos of mine, I think it's a genuine disservice to assume that you know somebody based on a sliver of biographical information. I will share a little bit of information about Jane Austen here because I believe that the greater disservice to her was the century of deliberate redaction on the part of her family, right down to her epitaph, which reads in its entirety, "In memory of Jane Austen, youngest daughter of the late Reverend George Austen, formerly rector of Steventon in this county, she departed this life on the 18th of July, 1817, aged 41, after a long illness supported with the patience and the hopes of a Christian. The benevolence of her heart, the sweetness of her temper, and the extraordinary endowments of her mind obtained the regard of all who knew her and the warmest love of her intimate connections. Their grief is in proportion to their affection. They know their loss to be irreparable, but in their deepest affliction they are consoled by a firm though humble hope that her charity, devotion, faith, and purity have rendered her soul acceptance into the sight of her Redeemer." One of the greatest and most widely read authors ever. Not a word said in her epitaph about her writing, other than a sort of adjacent reference to the endowments of her mind, that she was smart. Great. Thanks, Henry. So here's a few things you might not know about Jane Austen. I don't know how or if this might change your perception of the author. I include them here in the interest of interest, and to provide a broader picture than you might have otherwise known. There are 3 manuscripts, known as volumes the first, the second, and the third, which comprise most of her childhood writings, which she began when she was about 12 years old. They are now available in print. They're variously known as the teenage writings, juvenilia, or early writings, and they are an absolute laugh riot. All of the smoothing out that happens when somebody is writing for public consumption is not there, and so what is left is a hilarious and apt and witty collection of short stories and plays, and some of them are savage satires of sensationalist novels of the period. She was really, really talented and really skilled in her observation of the foibles of human existence, even in her earliest days. It's really impressive to read. At one point, she was contacted by and met with the royal librarian for the Prince Regent after the Prince Regent expressed a liking for her novels. Despite her patent dislike of the Prince Regent, who was known at the time to be a womanizing, gambling wastrel, she was kind of socially strong-armed into dedicating Emma to him. So after this meeting with the royal librarian, he provided her with some grade A mansplaining on how to better write her novels. And as a result, she wrote a hilariously savage piece of prose entitled Plan of a Novel According to Hints from Various Quarters, in which she outlines the plan for a kind of novel that was being suggested to her, which is not only outside of her interest, but firmly outside of the style that had made her so popular already. So take that, Rebecca Solnit. Jane Austen did it first. So the hobby of genealogy was actually popular with the Austen family, including with Austen herself. So some of the surnames that appear in her early novels can actually be found on the maternal side of her family. However, her family used this same hobby and the same knowledge of ancestors to pretty generously pad out the memoir with totally irrelevant mentions of distant ancestors of the Austen family, seemingly to both fill pages and affirm their own status in society. The biography as we know it today and how it's approached today is very different from times gone by. In some ways, privacy is more protected nowadays, it being written into the law in many places. But in other ways, we're much more likely to know a lot of personal details about authors, politicians, celebrities, and prominent public figures, both past and present. People are eulogized, commemorated, and biographized significantly before their deaths. I think probably to capitalize on their popularity and the recency of sources. I have to admit, I'm of two minds when I think of which of these attitudes I prefer. I'm enraged and unsettled in equal measure at the paternalistic editing of facts of Jane Austen's life, but I also squirm with real discomfort whenever I realize that I know very intimate details about certain celebrities that I don't even particularly care about, just by virtue of cultural osmosis. I feel like asking humans to either lay by their curiosities or lay by their biases when discussing those we admire might be asking a little bit too much of us as an unfailingly fallible species. But, you know, we could give it a try. So now more than ever, question what you know. Ask yourself why you think you know something. Ask yourself why you were told what you were told and why some things may have been left out. In the case of famous people and their lives, maybe a good question to start with is, why do we need to know? There aren't easy answers to a lot of these questions, but I feel like asking them is the right step. My little reticule is done, at least the outside. I'm going to embroider it and line it, but it's done for the most part. It's got this cute little ribbon. It's got a little drawstring, little silk reticule. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more of this kind of content, please hit subscribe and like this video. If you'd like to see my videos ad-free in advance or get access to exclusive behind-the-scenes content, you can become a Patreon patron at the link below. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you soon. And what's that sentence? Why did not we realize it before? Wow, that was a little bit Shakespearean, Liz. Let's try that again. Icons of American, not American literature, Liz. Ooh. To be stop. For heaven's sakes. Why you shout, Bear? Why are you shouting? What's wrong, my sweet bear? Oh, no, that's the tripod, sweetie. No, don't go under the tripod. Come back out. Yeah, good girl. Do you want to sit? No, you're gonna leave. That's cool too. Yep, I was not recording for that whole last bit. Fantastic. Oh, Christ, no. Oh, so many words. There were so many words in that one.